Long before the Mongol Empire became the largest contiguous land empire in human history, before armies thundered across Asia and Europe, and before kings trembled at the mere mention of his name, there was only a boy struggling to survive on the endless grasslands of Mongolia. That boy was Temujin. Few people could have imagined that this abandoned child would one day unite the divided tribes of the steppe and change the course of world history forever. The story begins in the vast plains of Central Asia around the year 1162. Endless grasslands stretched beyond the horizon, broken only by rivers, rocky hills, and the occasional cluster of felled yurts. Life here was harsh. Winters were brutally cold, summers unbearably hot, and survival depended on strength, loyalty, and the ability to ride and fight. Temujin was born into the Borjigin clan, the son of a respected tribal chief named Yesugei. According to Mongol legend, the newborn entered the world clutching a blood clot in his tiny fist, an omen that shamans interpreted as the sign of a future warrior destined for greatness. His father believed the prophecy. From an early age, Temujin learned the skills every nomadic child needed. He rode horses almost before he could walk. He learned to hunt with a bow, survive in the wilderness, and endure the unforgiving climate of the Mongolian steppe. But destiny had far crueler plans. When Temujin was only 9 years old, Yesugei arranged a future marriage between his son and a young girl named Berthe, following Mongol tradition. On his journey home, Yesugei accepted hospitality from members of a rival Tatar tribe. The meal was poisoned. Within days, the tribal chief was dead. His death changed everything. Without a strong leader, Yesugei's followers abandoned the family almost immediately. Temujin, his mother Helun, his brothers and sisters were cast out into the wilderness with no protection, no livestock, and almost no food. For most families on the steppe, this was a death sentence. The young Temujin experienced starvation unlike anything he had ever known. His family survived by digging roots from frozen ground, gathering wild berries, catching fish in icy rivers, and hunting small animals whenever possible. Some days there was nothing to eat at all. Every sunrise became another battle for survival. These years shaped Temujin more than any future battlefield ever would. He learned that strength alone meant nothing without loyalty. He learned that power could disappear overnight. Most importantly, he learned never to depend entirely on others. Life within the family was equally difficult. Competition for food became desperate. According to the secret history of the Mongols, Temujin eventually killed his older half-brother Bektar during a dispute over hunting spoils. While historians continue to debate the exact details, the story reflects the brutal reality of life on the steppe, where survival often demanded impossible choices. Soon another disaster struck. Members of the Taichiu tribe captured Temujin. To prevent his escape, they locked him inside a heavy wooden collar and displayed him as a prisoner. For many captives, this would have been the end. Not for Temujin. One night, taking advantage of a moment when his guards relaxed, he escaped into the darkness. Legend tells us that a compassionate family secretly hid the young prisoner, risking execution if they were discovered. Temujin never forgot this act of kindness. Years later, when he became ruler, he rewarded loyalty above noble birth. This simple lesson would become one of the foundations of his future empire. As Temujin entered adulthood, he slowly gathered followers around him. These were not wealthy nobles. Many were poor shepherds, former prisoners, hunters or warriors who had lost faith in the traditional tribal system. What united them was not blood, it was belief. Temujin treated capable men with respect, regardless of where they were born. For the rigid social order of the Mongolian steppe, this was revolutionary. Then another challenge threatened to destroy everything he had built. Shortly after marrying Berthe, warriors from the Merkit tribe launched a surprise attack and kidnapped her. For Temujin, this was more than a personal tragedy, it was a test of leadership. Unable to rescue her alone, he sought help from two powerful allies. The first was Toghrul, ruler of the Kereit tribe and an old friend of his late father. The second was his closest companion, Jamuha. Together, they launched a lightning campaign against the Merkits. The attack was swift and devastating. Berthe was rescued. The victory transformed Temujin from an ambitious young warrior into a respected military leader. But success often creates new enemies. As Temujin's influence grew, so did tensions with Jamukha. Although the two men had once sworn eternal brotherhood, they believed in completely different visions for the future of Mongolia. Jamukha represented the traditional aristocracy. He believed leadership belonged only to noble families. Temujin believed something entirely different. He promoted warriors based on courage, discipline and ability, not family connections. Talented men could rise through the ranks regardless of their birth. To many Mongol nobles, these ideas were dangerous. Civil war became inevitable. For years, the Mongolian steppe descended into chaos. Tribes constantly changed sides. Old alliances collapsed. Battles erupted across the grasslands. Temujin suffered painful defeats. He lost followers. He nearly lost everything more than once. Yet each setback made him stronger. Instead of blaming fate, he studied every mistake. If an enemy outmaneuvered him, he developed faster cavalry tactics. If rival tribes fought with greater coordination, he improved his own command structure. Slowly, more warriors began joining his banner. They saw something different in Temujin. Unlike many tribal chiefs, he distributed captured wealth fairly. He punished theft within his own army. He demanded strict discipline. Most importantly, he rewarded loyalty above noble birth. By the beginning of the 13th century, Temujin controlled much of the Mongolian steppe. Only one major rival remained: Jamukha. Their final struggle would decide the future of Mongolia itself. After years of conflict, Jamukha's support collapsed. Many of his own followers deserted him. Eventually, he was betrayed and delivered alive to Temujin. According to Mongol tradition, Temujin offered his old friend one final chance to stand beside him. Jamukha refused. He understood that two leaders could never rule one nation. Respecting their former bond, Temujin ordered that Jamukha be executed without bloodshed, a death considered honorable among Mongol nobles. With his greatest rival gone, nothing stood in Temujin's way. In the spring of 1206, tribal leaders gathered at a great Kurultai. There they proclaimed Temujin the supreme ruler of all Mongol tribes. He received a new title: Genghis Khan. The exact meaning remains debated by historians, but it is often translated as universal ruler or oceanic Khan, symbolizing authority that stretched as far as the horizon itself. But becoming Genghis Khan was only the beginning. He immediately began transforming scattered nomadic tribes into something the world had never seen before: a disciplined military state. He reorganized society using a decimal system, dividing warriors into units of 10, 100, 1000 and 10,000. Promotion depended on merit rather than birth. Strict laws enforced discipline. Loyalty became the highest virtue. Within only a few years, these reforms would produce one of the most efficient fighting forces in history. To neighboring kingdoms, the Mongols still looked like simple horsemen living in tents on the open steppe. They had no idea that a storm was gathering. Soon, those same riders would ride out of Mongolia and begin conquering kingdoms that had stood for centuries. By the year 1206, the tribes of the Mongolian steppe had finally been united under one ruler. Temujin was now known as Genghis Khan, but he had no intention of stopping with Mongolia alone. While neighboring kingdoms dismissed the Mongols as little more than wandering horsemen, Genghis Khan was quietly building something the medieval world had never seen before. It was not simply an army, it was a military machine designed for speed, discipline, and absolute efficiency. Unlike the great kingdoms of China or the Islamic world, Mongolia possessed no enormous cities, no rich farmland, and no vast reserves of wealth. The Mongols had to rely on something far more valuable: organization. Genghis Khan understood that loyalty to individual tribes had nearly destroyed his people for generations. If he wanted to build an empire, those old divisions had to disappear forever. He began by reorganizing his entire nation. Every warrior belonged to a military unit rather than a tribe. 10 men formed an arban. 10 arbans created a company of 100. 10 companies formed a 1,000-man unit, and 10,000 warriors became a tumen, the largest standard formation in the Mongol army. This simple system transformed command and communication. Orders could travel quickly through the ranks, and every commander knew exactly who was under his authority. But perhaps the most revolutionary change was how officers were chosen. Throughout much of the medieval world, noble birth determined military rank. Genghis Khan rejected that idea completely. A shepherd with exceptional skill could command nobles. A common warrior who proved brave and intelligent could become one of the empire's greatest generals. Merit replaced ancestry. The result was an army led by its most capable men. Among those leaders were two military geniuses whose names would become legendary: Subutai and Jebe. Neither was born into great wealth. Both earned their positions through extraordinary talent. Subutai, in particular, would eventually command campaigns across thousands of miles, defeating armies from China to Eastern Europe. Modern military historians often rank him among the greatest strategists in history. Discipline became the foundation of Mongol power. Every soldier was responsible not only for himself, but also for the man beside him. If one warrior abandoned his position in battle, the punishment could extend to his entire unit. Cowardice, theft, and disobedience were treated as serious crimes. On the battlefield, hesitation could cost thousands of lives. The Mongols simply could not afford disorder. Every aspect of daily life prepared them for war. From childhood, boys learned to ride almost before they could walk. Archery was not a sport, it was survival. Children hunted while riding at full speed, firing arrows with remarkable accuracy. By adulthood, every Mongol warrior had spent years mastering skills that many enemy soldiers struggled to learn in a lifetime. The horse itself became one of the empire's greatest weapons. Unlike European knights who often relied on a single heavy warhorse, Mongol cavalrymen traveled with several horses each. When one animal became tired, another immediately took its place. This allowed entire armies to travel extraordinary distances without exhausting their mounts. Some campaigns covered nearly 100 kilometers in a single day. To medieval kingdoms, such speed seemed impossible. Entire armies often appeared where no enemy was expected. A city that believed it had weeks to prepare might suddenly find Mongol scouts outside its walls. Their weapons reflected the same philosophy of efficiency. The most feared was the Mongol composite bow. Made from layers of wood, horn, and animal sinew, it was smaller than many European bows, but remarkably powerful. From horseback, experienced archers could fire several arrows in rapid succession while riding at full speed. Their accuracy shocked opponents across Asia and Europe. Every warrior also carried additional weapons: curved sabers for close combat, spears, axes, ropes for capturing prisoners, and knives for survival. Armor remained relatively light, allowing mobility instead of sacrificing speed for protection. But perhaps the Mongols' greatest advantage was something no weapon could provide: information. Long before invading a country, Genghis Khan sent merchants, scouts, diplomats, and spies across its borders. They mapped roads, they studied rivers, they counted soldiers. They learned which cities were wealthy, which governors were corrupt, and which neighboring rulers hated each other. By the time the army arrived, Mongol commanders often knew more about the enemy than the enemy knew about itself. This intelligence became the foundation of their campaigns. If a kingdom suffered from political divisions, the Mongols exploited them. If rival nobles competed for power, they encouraged betrayal. If local populations disliked their rulers, they offered favorable treatment in exchange for surrender. Military victory often began long before the first battle. Psychological warfare became another powerful weapon. Cities that surrendered peacefully were frequently spared. Their craftsmen, engineers, doctors, and scholars were protected and brought into Mongol service. But cities that resisted faced devastating consequences. Stories of destroyed fortresses spread rapidly along the Silk Road. Sometimes fear alone convinced defenders to open their gates. One of the Mongols' most famous battlefield tactics was the feigned retreat. During combat, cavalry units would suddenly turn and flee. Believing victory was within reach, enemy commanders ordered pursuit. The disciplined formations broke apart as soldiers chased the retreating horsemen across open ground. That was exactly what the Mongols wanted. Hidden cavalry units emerged from both flanks. Mounted archers wheeled around and unleashed thousands of arrows. Within minutes, the hunters became the hunted. This tactic repeatedly destroyed armies that were larger and on paper stronger than the Mongols. As the army grew, Genghis Khan recognized another weakness. His cavalry dominated open battlefields, but heavily fortified cities required different skills. Rather than destroying everyone they conquered, he recruited specialists. Chinese engineers built trebuchets and siege towers. Persian craftsmen improved logistics. Captured blacksmiths forged better weapons. Instead of rejecting foreign knowledge, the Mongols embraced it. Every victory made their army stronger than before. The first major test of this new military system came against the kingdom of Western Xia. Located along important trade routes, the Tangut kingdom had long influenced the politics of northern China and the Mongolian steppe. The campaign demonstrated everything Genghis Khan had been preparing for. His cavalry moved with astonishing speed. Supply lines remained organized despite enormous distances. Engineers supported the advance with siege equipment. The Tangut rulers quickly realized they faced an enemy unlike any before. After several successful campaigns, Western Xia accepted Mongol dominance and agreed to pay tribute. The victory gave Genghis Khan something even more valuable than territory: confidence. If one kingdom could fall, others could as well. His attention soon turned toward a far greater prize. To the south lay the Jin dynasty, one of the richest and most powerful states on earth. Its cities housed millions of people. Its armies vastly outnumbered the Mongols. Its massive walls seemed impossible to breach. Chinese commanders laughed at the idea that steppe horsemen could threaten their empire. They would soon discover how dangerous that assumption truly was. The conquest of northern China would prove that Genghis Khan's army was no longer simply the greatest cavalry force in history. It had become a military empire capable of defeating civilizations many times its own size. And beyond China, an even greater conflict was approaching. Far to the west stood the wealthy Khwarazmian Empire, whose rulers controlled the trade routes between east and west. A single political mistake would soon trigger one of the most devastating invasions the medieval world had ever witnessed. By the early 1220s, Genghis Khan had already transformed the Mongols from scattered nomadic tribes into the most disciplined military force in Asia. Northern China had suffered devastating defeats, Western Xia had been forced into submission, and news of the Mongol victories was spreading along the Silk Road. Yet one empire remained untouched. To the west stood the Khwarazmian Empire, one of the richest and most powerful states in the medieval world. Stretching from modern-day Iran and Turkmenistan to Uzbekistan and parts of Afghanistan, it controlled some of the greatest cities of the Islamic Golden Age. Bukhara, Samarkand and Gurgan were thriving centers of commerce, science and culture. Its ruler, Shah Muhammad II, commanded an army far larger than Genghis Khan's. Confident in his strength, the Shah believed no army from the eastern steppes could threaten his empire. At first, Genghis Khan had no intention of invading. Instead of soldiers, he sent merchants. The Mongol ruler hoped to establish peaceful trade relations between the two empires. A large caravan crossed the border carrying valuable goods, silks, furs, precious metals and gifts meant to strengthen diplomatic ties. The caravan never reached its destination. In the border city of Otrar, the local governor accused the merchants of espionage. Without waiting for the Shah's approval, he ordered them arrested. Nearly all were executed. When news reached Genghis Khan, he chose diplomacy over war. He sent 3 official ambassadors to demand justice and the punishment of the governor responsible. The Shah made a fatal mistake. Rather than apologizing, he ordered one ambassador executed and the others humiliated before sending them back. Among the Mongols, killing diplomats was one of the greatest possible insults. Negotiation was over. War had become inevitable. In 1219, Genghis Khan assembled one of the largest armies he had ever commanded. Although historians debate the exact numbers, it likely consisted of around 100,000 to 120,000 highly trained cavalry, supported by engineers, siege specialists, and auxiliary troops from conquered territories. The Shah expected the Mongols to advance along the most direct roads. Instead, they did the opposite. The Mongol army split into several independent columns, each following a different route across deserts, mountains and rivers. Their movements confused the Khwarazmian commanders. No one knew where the main attack would come. By the time the Shah realized what was happening, Mongol forces were already deep inside his empire. The first major objective was Otrar. The city had strong walls and experienced defenders. Its governor believed he could withstand any siege. For months, Mongol engineers bombarded the fortifications with trebuchets and catapults. Supply lines were completely cut off. Eventually, betrayal opened the gates. Otrar fell. Its destruction sent a clear message across Central Asia. Cities that surrendered peacefully might survive. Those that resisted risked annihilation. From Otrar, the Mongols advanced toward one of the most celebrated cities in the Islamic world, Bukhara. Its magnificent mosques, libraries, and bustling markets had attracted merchants from across Asia for centuries. The city's defenders expected a long siege. Instead, Mongol cavalry crossed terrain that local commanders believed was impossible to traverse. Appearing where no enemy was expected, they surrounded Bukhara with astonishing speed. After fierce fighting, the city surrendered. According to later Persian chronicles, Genghis Khan entered the main mosque and addressed the city's elite. Although historians debate the exact wording, the speech became legendary, symbolizing the dramatic fall of one of Central Asia's greatest cities. The psychological impact was enormous. If Bukhara could fall, nowhere seemed safe.
Next came Samarkand. Unlike Bukhara, Samarkand possessed a much larger garrison. The Shah had concentrated thousands of professional soldiers inside the city, including heavy cavalry and war elephants. On paper, it appeared impossible for the Mongols to succeed, but Genghis Khan understood something his enemies did not. Large armies are useless without coordination. Rather than launching one massive assault, Mongol commanders attacked from multiple directions. Mounted archers harassed defenders day and night. Small cavalry detachments pretended to retreat, drawing enemy forces outside the walls. Hidden units then surrounded and destroyed them. Within days, morale collapsed. Some commanders surrendered, others fled. Samarkand fell. The Shah's confidence disappeared with it. Instead of organizing a united defense, Muhammad II abandoned one city after another. He fled westward, hoping to rebuild his army. Genghis Khan refused to let him escape. He entrusted two of his greatest generals, Subutai and Jebe, with an extraordinary mission: find the Shah, no matter how far he runs. The pursuit became one of the longest cavalry operations of the Middle Ages. Subutai and Jebe crossed deserts, mountain ranges, and vast plains, following their enemy for thousands of kilometers. The Shah never managed to regroup. Exhausted, isolated, and increasingly abandoned by his own supporters, he eventually died on a small island in the Caspian Sea. The Khwarazmian Empire had effectively ceased to exist. Yet the campaign was not over. Some of the fiercest resistance came from Gurganj, one of the wealthiest cities in Central Asia. Unlike previous battles fought in open country, Gurganj's canals, narrow streets, and defensive walls limited the effectiveness of Mongol cavalry. Urban warfare followed. Street by street, house by house, the fighting lasted for weeks. Even after the walls were breached, defenders continued resisting. The battle taught the Mongols valuable lessons. Future campaigns would rely even more heavily on engineers, siege specialists, and coordinated assaults. With Central Asia conquered, Genghis Khan turned his attention elsewhere. But Subutai and Jebe had received different orders: continue west, explore unknown lands, gather intelligence, avoid unnecessary risks. What followed became one of history's greatest reconnaissance expeditions. Leading only a relatively small force, the two generals crossed the Caucasus Mountains. They defeated Georgian armies. They negotiated temporary alliances with steppe tribes before defeating those same allies when circumstances changed. Every campaign expanded Mongol knowledge of the Western world. Eventually, their scouts reached the vast plains north of the Black Sea. There, they encountered the Cumans, powerful nomadic warriors who had long dominated the region. Unable to defeat the Mongols alone, the Cumans appealed to the princes of Kievan Rus for help. Several Russian princes agreed. Together, they assembled one of the largest coalitions the Mongols had yet faced. Confident in their numerical superiority, the allied commanders advanced toward the Mongol army. Subutai had anticipated exactly this response. His cavalry began to retreat. For several days, the Mongols appeared to flee across the steppe. The Rus and Cuman forces pursued them relentlessly. Slowly, their formations stretched farther apart. Communication between the princes broke down. Some units advanced too quickly, others lagged behind. The coalition lost its unity. That was the moment Subutai had been waiting for. Near the Kalka River in 1223, the Mongols suddenly turned to fight. Hidden cavalry units emerged from multiple directions. Mounted archers unleashed wave after wave of arrows. Panic spread through the allied ranks. Separated from one another, the princes could no longer coordinate their defense. One contingent after another was surrounded and destroyed. The Battle of the Kalka River ended in complete Mongol victory. Yet the conquerors did something unexpected. Instead of invading the lands of Rus, they turned back toward the east. Their mission had never been conquest, it had been reconnaissance. Subutai now possessed priceless information about Eastern Europe, its rivers, roads, fortresses, political divisions, and military weaknesses. Years later, that knowledge would guide a far larger invasion. The Mongols had not merely conquered an empire, they had opened the gateway to Europe.
When Genghis Khan died in 1227, many rulers across Asia believed the Mongol threat would fade away. Throughout history, empires often crumbled after the death of their founder. Powerful kingdoms expected the same fate for the Mongols. They were wrong. Genghis Khan had done more than conquer nations, he had built a system. His generals were experienced, his officers were disciplined, and his sons and grandsons inherited not only an empire, but also a military machine unlike anything the medieval world had ever seen. The responsibility for expanding the empire westward eventually fell to one of Genghis Khan's grandsons. His name was Batu Khan. At his side stood the empire's greatest military strategist, Subutai, now an aging commander whose decades of campaigning had earned him an unmatched understanding of warfare. Together, they prepared for the largest Western expedition in Mongol history. Their army was enormous by the standards of the time.
Although exact numbers remain debated by historians, it likely consisted of well over 100,000 troops, including Mongol cavalry, Turkic horsemen, engineers from China, and specialists recruited from previously conquered lands. Every soldier understood his role, every commander knew the overall strategy, nothing was left to chance. Before launching the invasion, Mongol scouts spent months gathering intelligence. They mapped rivers, measured roads, located bridges, studied forests and mountain passes. They learned which princes distrusted one another and which kingdoms were unlikely to cooperate. Long before the first battle, the Mongols already understood their enemies. Their first objective was the fragmented principalities of Kievan Rus. Unlike a united kingdom, Rus was divided among competing princes who often viewed each other as rivals. This political fragmentation created exactly the opportunity Batu Khan needed. In the winter of 1237, the Mongol army crossed the frozen frontier. The first major target was the Principality of Ryazan. The Mongols demanded submission and tribute. The princes refused. The siege began. Chinese-built trebuchets pounded the city walls day and night. Archers prevented defenders from organizing counterattacks. After several days of relentless assault, the walls collapsed. Street fighting followed. The city fell. For neighboring rulers, the destruction of Ryazan served as a terrifying warning. Yet instead of forming a united army, the Russian principalities continued to fight separately. One after another, cities faced the Mongol advance. Kolomna, Moscow, Vladimir, each attempted to resist, each eventually fell. The Mongols rarely attacked recklessly. Instead, they surrounded cities, cut supply lines, and used siege engines with remarkable efficiency. If defenders surrendered early, they often received more favorable treatment. If they resisted until the end, the consequences could be devastating. Not every city surrendered easily. One of the most remarkable defenses took place at Kozelsk. Although relatively small, the town resisted the Mongols for nearly 7 weeks. Its defenders launched repeated counterattacks despite overwhelming odds. The siege became so costly that Batu reportedly referred to Kozelsk as the evil city because of the fierce resistance it offered. Even Mongol commanders respected the determination of its defenders. By 1240, only one great city remained, Kiev. Once the political and cultural heart of Kievan Rus, Kiev still possessed impressive defensive walls and a determined garrison under the command of Voivode Dmitro. The Mongols offered surrender, the defenders refused. Trebuchets battered the walls continuously, engineers dug beneath fortifications, archers dominated every exposed section of the defenses. After weeks of fighting, a breach finally opened. The Mongols poured into the city, house by house, street by street. The battle continued until organized resistance collapsed. Kiev had fallen. With the Russian principalities defeated, the road into Central Europe lay open. Most medieval rulers expected the Mongols to continue advancing along a single route. Instead, Batu and Subutai once again divided their forces. One army marched into Poland, another entered Hungary. The strategy forced European rulers to split their own armies rather than unite against a single invasion. It was exactly the outcome the Mongols wanted. In April 1241, one Mongol force encountered a coalition led by Duke Henry II of Silesia near the town of Legnica. Knights from Poland, Silesia and several German territories assembled to block the invasion. European heavy cavalry had long dominated medieval battlefields. Many believed armored knights were unstoppable. The Mongols proved otherwise. As the battle began, Mongol cavalry appeared to lose ground. They turned and retreated. Believing victory was close, the European knights charged after them. Their disciplined formation dissolved during the pursuit. Then the trap was sprung. Hidden Mongol cavalry emerged from both flanks. Mounted archers surrounded the advancing knights. Thousands of arrows filled the air. The confused European army struggled to regroup. Within hours, the coalition collapsed. Duke Henry II was killed. The victory shocked Europe. Almost simultaneously, Batu Khan confronted an even larger challenge: the Kingdom of Hungary. King Bela IV had assembled one of the strongest armies in Central Europe. Confident in his numbers, he established his camp near the Sayo River, believing the river itself would slow the Mongol advance. Subutai had another plan. During the night, Mongol engineers secretly constructed additional bridges downstream. Before sunrise, part of the army crossed the river undetected. At dawn, Hungarian commanders suddenly discovered Mongol forces attacking from multiple directions. The battle that followed became known as the Battle of Mohi. Mounted archers surrounded the Hungarian camp. Trebuchets launched stones into crowded defensive positions. When the defenders attempted to break out, fresh Mongol cavalry blocked every escape route. Panic spread rapidly. The once powerful Hungarian army disintegrated. King Bela escaped with only a handful of companions. Hungary lay open before the conquerors. Over the following months, Mongol forces swept across the countryside. Towns and fortresses surrendered. Refugees fled toward Austria. Across Europe, fear spread faster than the Mongol cavalry itself. Rumors exaggerated the size of the invading army. Some claimed millions of warriors were approaching. Others believed the invaders were an unstoppable force sent as divine punishment. Kings strengthened castles. Cities stockpiled food. The Pope called for unity among Christian rulers. Many believed France, Germany and even northern Italy would soon face invasion. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the Mongols stopped. In the spring of 1242, Batu Khan ordered his armies to withdraw from Central Europe. To those who had witnessed the destruction, the decision made little sense. Why would an undefeated army abandon its greatest victories? The answer lay thousands of miles away. News arrived that Ögedei Khan, the great Khan and son of Genghis Khan, had died in Mongolia. According to Mongol tradition, senior members of the royal family were expected to participate in the selection of a new great Khan. Political uncertainty, combined with the enormous logistical challenge of maintaining such distant campaigns, contributed to the decision to halt the western advance. Historians continue to debate whether Ögedei's death alone explains the withdrawal, but there is little doubt that it changed the course of European history. Western Europe had escaped invasion, perhaps only temporarily. The Mongol Empire had reached the height of its military power. From the Pacific Ocean to the plains of Hungary, few armies had successfully resisted its advance. Yet conquering an empire was one challenge. Keeping it together would prove to be another. By the middle of the 13th century, the Mongol Empire had reached a scale that no civilization had ever achieved before. From the Pacific Ocean to the plains of Eastern Europe, from the frozen forests of Siberia to the deserts of Persia, nearly a quarter of the world's land was ruled by the descendants of Genghis Khan. It was the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Merchants traveled thousands of miles beneath the protection of Mongol law. Messages crossed continents through an extraordinary postal network. Armies that had once seemed invincible had been defeated one after another. It appeared that nothing could stop the Mongols.
Yet history has shown that conquering an empire is often easier than governing one. After the death of Genghis Khan, the empire continued to expand under his sons and grandsons. New campaigns carried Mongol armies deeper into the Middle East, China, Korea, and Eastern Europe. But the farther the empire grew, the harder it became to control.
Communication across such enormous distances could take weeks or even months. By the time an order reached a distant frontier, the situation had often changed completely. Local commanders were increasingly forced to make decisions on their own. Slowly, different regions of the empire began developing their own identities. One of the most dramatic campaigns of this period took place in the Middle East. In 1258, Genghis Khan's grandson Hulagu Khan marched against Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. For more than 5 centuries, Baghdad had been one of the greatest cities on earth. It was a center of science, mathematics, medicine, philosophy, and literature. Its famous libraries attracted scholars from across the Islamic world. Many believed such a magnificent city could never fall. The Mongols proved otherwise. After surrounding Baghdad, Hulagu demanded its surrender. The caliph refused. Mongol engineers constructed massive siege machines around the city. Trebuchets launched enormous stones against the walls day and night. Engineers diverted parts of the Tigris River to isolate sections of the defenses. Within weeks, the walls were breached. The city surrendered. The fall of Baghdad marked the end of the Abbasid Caliphate as a major political power. The destruction shocked the medieval world. For many people, it seemed as though no civilization could survive a Mongol invasion. Yet only 2 years later, the Mongols suffered one of the most important defeats in their history. In 1260, near the spring of Ain Jalut in present-day Israel, they encountered the army of the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt. Unlike previous opponents, the Mamluks had carefully studied Mongol tactics. They understood the danger of pursuing a retreating cavalry force. They knew how Mongol horse archers operated. Most importantly, they refused to underestimate their enemy. The battle was fierce.
At one point, the Mamluks deliberately staged their own retreat, luring Mongol cavalry into an ambush. Fresh Mamluk forces attacked from concealed positions. For the first time, a major Mongol army was decisively defeated in open battle. The myth of Mongol invincibility had been broken. While Hulagu struggled in the Middle East, another grandson of Genghis Khan was transforming the empire in the east. His name was Kublai Khan. Unlike many earlier Mongol rulers, Kublai recognized that governing China required more than military strength. In 1271, he proclaimed the Yuan dynasty, becoming emperor of China. Rather than ruling solely as a steppe conqueror, he embraced many aspects of Chinese administration, taxation, and government. Under Kublai's reign, trade flourished, roads improved, cities expanded. The Silk Road experienced one of its greatest periods of prosperity. Travelers from distant lands visited the Mongol Empire in numbers never seen before. Among them was the Venetian merchant Marco Polo, whose accounts introduced many Europeans to the extraordinary wealth and sophistication of Asia. Yet beneath this prosperity, the empire was beginning to fracture. The descendants of Genghis Khan increasingly disagreed over succession, territory, and political authority. The vast empire gradually divided into several major khanates. In China, the Yuan dynasty ruled under Kublai Khan. Across Persia and the Middle East, the Ilkhanate emerged. Central Asia became the Chagatai Khanate. The western territories evolved into the Golden Horde, which dominated much of Eastern Europe and influenced the Russian principalities for centuries. Although these states shared a common origin, they no longer acted as a single empire. Wars between members of the same royal family became increasingly common. The dream of one united Mongol Empire slowly disappeared. Several factors contributed to its decline. Distance was one of the greatest challenges. Even the fastest horsemen could not effectively govern an empire stretching across 2 continents. Cultural differences created additional difficulties. China possessed ancient bureaucratic traditions. Persia followed Islamic law. The Mongolian homeland remained largely nomadic. The Russian principalities developed under entirely different customs. One government could not easily satisfy such different societies. There was also a deeper problem. For generations, conquest had united the empire. New victories brought wealth, land, and prestige. But eventually, there were fewer
fewer great empires left to conquer. Without expansion, rival branches of the royal family increasingly turned against one another. Internal conflict replaced external conquest. Yet despite its political fragmentation, the Mongol Empire left an extraordinary legacy. Historians often describe the 13th and early 14th centuries as the era of the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. For the first time in centuries, merchants could travel safely across much of Eurasia under Mongol protection. Silk, spices, precious metals, paper, gunpowder, printing technology, scientific knowledge, and artistic ideas moved between East and West faster than ever before. The Mongols also created one of history's most efficient communication systems. Known as the Yam, it consisted of relay stations positioned across the empire. Fresh horses, supplies, and accommodations allowed official messengers to travel at remarkable speed. Many later governments adopted similar concepts for long-distance communication. Military strategy changed forever as well. European and Asian commanders studied Mongol campaigns for generations. They learned the importance of mobility, reconnaissance, logistics, disciplined command structures, and coordinated cavalry operations. The Mongols demonstrated that intelligence, planning, and speed could defeat armies many times larger. But one question remains.
Did only 100,000 Mongol warriors truly conquer half the world? The answer is both yes and no. During the early years of Genghis Khan's campaigns, the core Mongol army was relatively small, probably around 100,000 highly trained horsemen, although exact numbers remain uncertain. Those forces achieved astonishing victories and laid the foundations of the empire. However, as the empire expanded, its armies became increasingly multinational. Turkic cavalry, Chinese engineers, Persian administrators, Korean craftsmen, and countless allied or conquered peoples all became part of the Mongol war machine. The empire's greatest campaigns were no longer fought by ethnic Mongols alone. The legend of 100,000 warriors conquering half the world captures the remarkable rise of Genghis Khan, but the reality was even more extraordinary. It was not simply numbers that changed history, it was leadership, discipline, organization, innovation,
and a willingness to learn from every enemy they defeated. More than 8 centuries later, the legacy of Genghis Khan continues to fascinate historians around the world. His empire reshaped trade, warfare, diplomacy, and the balance of power across Eurasia. Few rulers have left a greater mark on history, and few stories demonstrate more clearly how a small nation from the windswept steppes of Mongolia rose to build the greatest land empire the world has ever known.